Good afternoon and welcome to this week's edition of Crowder's Corner here on LinkedIn. I'm Mike Crowder. Once again, I'm having a bad hair day, a bad mustache day. I haven't shaved, and as usual, I have the perfect face for radio. At any rate, we are at the halfway point of the Republican convention on this August 26th, 2020. Now, so far, we have seen some really good speeches at the Republican convention after President Trump was nominated to run for a second term in office against Democratic nominee Joe Biden in the November general election. Now, two of those great speakers came from a state I lived in for 26 years, African-American U.S. Senator Tim Scott and Asian-American and former governor and UN ambassador under President Trump, Nikki Haley. I covered both of them as a radio news reporter in South Carolina. They are both rising stars in the Republican Party, and they both spoke of the accomplishments and achievements that President Trump has done during his first term in office. Those have been obscured quite a bit by the coronavirus pandemic and the racial unrest that followed the murder of George Floyd by a Minneapolis police officer and other similar incidents. Now, another speech that I thought was very good came from Kim Klacik. You may not have heard of her. I hadn't heard of her until last week. She is running as an African-American Republican congressional candidate for a district that includes much of the city of Baltimore. And she could have spoke 2 or 3 times longer as far as I'm concerned. She walked through some of the less desirable parts of Baltimore and noted that it has a higher than average crime rate, a higher than average murder rate, in fact, the top 10 in the nation, and a poverty rate of more than 20%. Her point is that it has been ruled by Democratic mayors and members of Congress and other local, state, and federal elected officials for more than 50 years, and it's still in the shape that it's in, which she says is not very good. Now, this convention has featured about a half dozen members, or close to a half dozen members, of President Trump's family. Most notably, First Lady Melania Trump. Now, she so far has been the only speaker during the Republican convention that I have seen that made any mention of the coronavirus pandemic. She expressed her condolences, sympathy, and compassion and empathy for the victims of COVID-19, and also her support for the frontline healthcare workers who have fought to contain and to treat victims of COVID-19. Now, she was attacked unfairly and below the belt, I thought, by singer and actress Bette Midler through a series of tweets for her accent. Well, she moved to the United States from Yugoslavia in 1995, became a United States citizen in 2006, and has been a citizen of the United States for 15 years. No, she doesn't speak perfect English, but you can understand what she's saying. So I think that Bette Midler would have been better served to leave her Twitter account vacant on Tuesday night. Now, we've also had a couple of other notable, or shall we say, rising stars in the Republican Party in the African-American ranks. A Georgia Democratic African-American congressman who spoke on Trump's behalf, and also an elected official, the Kentucky Republican Attorney General, who spoke on President Trump's behalf. What the Republican convention has lacked is the heavy hitters that we saw at the Democratic National Convention. Former President George W. Bush isn't speaking. Neither is former Vice President Dick Cheney. The most notable and head-scratching exception from the convention to me is former House Speaker Newt Gingrich, who appears regularly on Fox News and is a vocal supporter of President Trump. He would have given a very, I think, compelling and powerful speech making the case for a second term for President Trump if he had been given the opportunity or took the opportunity to speak at the Republican convention. To my knowledge, that didn't happen and isn't going to happen. Being a regular on Fox News really is not on the same level as speaking at the Republican convention. Many more people, especially Democrats and independents, watch the conventions than watch Fox News. Now, there's been little mention other than Melania Trump of the coronavirus pandemic. Probably good reason for that. President Trump was fairly or unfairly criticized for his slow response to the virus. First, his critics said he denied it. Then he minimized it. Then he said we had it under control and he was slow to respond for it. He does have time to make up for that, though, beginning with his acceptance speech Thursday night. He needs to promise the American people that as many of them who want the coronavirus vaccine when it becomes available, hopefully by early next year, that they will get it in a timely fashion as quickly as possible at little or no cost. He also has to talk about building the economy, continuing to build the economy as we prepare to hopefully bring this coronavirus pandemic under control. That could mean extending unemployment benefits, providing more grants and loans to small businesses, more personal protective equipment to healthcare workers, and aid to state and local governments who have lost tax revenue due to the shutdowns and full or partial closings that have taken place because of COVID-19. Now, I think the president needs to stop the attacks on the Democratic presidential ticket. We've heard enough of him accusing Joe Biden of being a puppet of the radical left, and we heard enough of his attacks on vice presidential nominee Kamala Harris and the possibility that she may not be eligible or qualified to be vice president. Clearly she is. She was born in Oakland, California, and her parents immigrated from India and from Jamaica. So what else does President Trump need to do? He needs to do something he hasn't done very much of during his first term, and that is listen to criticism and the voices of those who disagree with him. Doesn't mean he needs to subscribe to their views, but he needs to listen carefully and consider whether those disagreements and criticism are proper and whether he should maybe take a different course. What he doesn't need to do is continue to attack the messenger. Now, he also needs to, in my opinion, broaden his appeal to women and minorities, and having women and African Americans speak during the convention is a start, but it's just that, a start. He also needs to reach out to the LGBT community, to college-educated voters, and to young voters. Those are some of the things that the president needs to do, starting with his acceptance speech Thursday night. He needs to have a vision of hope, of unity, of inclusion, and not one of divisiveness and personal attacks against Democrats. He could very well need more than 63 million votes in 2020 to secure a second term. That means he needs support from more independents and more Democrats than he received in 2016 when he won the electoral vote despite losing the popular vote to Hillary Clinton by almost 3 million votes. And that concludes this week's edition of Crowder's Corner here on LinkedIn. I'm Mike Crowder.